What does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to know something with certainty? And why do we even ask such questions in the first place? Philosophy begins not with answers, but with questions, questions that children instinctively ask, and that adults sometimes bury under the routines of daily living. Yet from the moment humans could wonder, from the first time someone looked up at the stars and asked, why, philosophy was born. When we ask, what is philosophy, we're not asking about a textbook subject or a collection of dusty names in history. We're asking about the very impulse that makes us human, the impulse to seek wisdom, to make sense of life, and to discover how to live well in a world full of uncertainty. The word itself tells us this. From the Greek philosophia, philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. It's not about having wisdom already, but about loving it enough to pursue it, no matter how difficult or endless that pursuit may be. Imagine a world without philosophy. No Socrates asking uncomfortable questions in the streets of Athens. No Aristotle building frameworks for science and ethics. No Confucius shaping societies with principles of harmony and virtue. Without philosophy, there would be no foundation for politics, no ethics guiding our actions, no attempt to understand reality beyond superstition. Philosophy is not some abstract luxury, it's the roots of nearly everything we take for granted in modern thought. But what exactly do philosophers do? At its core, philosophy is about the search for truth, meaning, and clarity. It asks, what is real? Metaphysics. How do we know what we know? Epistemology. What is the right way to live? Ethics. What is beauty? Aesthetics. And how should we organize our societies? Political philosophy. These questions are vast, but they aren't distant from us. They shape our choices, beliefs, and values every single day. Think about the ethical question, what is the right thing to do? Every time you feel torn between telling a harsh truth or protecting someone with a gentle lie, you're engaging in philosophy. When you wonder whether free will is real or whether we're shaped entirely by genetics and environment, you're engaging in philosophy. When you reflect on whether life has inherent meaning or whether we must create it ourselves, you're engaging in philosophy. You may not call yourself a philosopher, but you already live like one whenever you pause and reflect instead of just reacting. Socrates, perhaps the most famous of them all, believed philosophy begins in wonder. He walked the streets of Athens asking people simple but profound questions. What is justice? What is courage? What is friendship? Many claimed to know the answers, but Socrates exposed contradictions in their thinking. His goal was not to humiliate, but to awaken people to the fact that they did not yet have true wisdom. And in recognizing our ignorance, we take the first step toward genuine understanding. Here's the paradox: philosophy often gives us more questions than answers. That's why some dismiss it as impractical. But the power of philosophy isn't in handing out neat solutions, it's in sharpening the mind, expanding our vision, and deepening our humanity. The answers may change, but the act of questioning transforms us. Think of philosophy like a mirror. When you hold it up, it reflects who you are, what you believe, and what you value. Sometimes the reflection is uncomfortable. It shows our contradictions, our blind spots, our unexamined assumptions. But that's exactly why philosophy matters. It forces us to live more consciously instead of drifting through life on autopilot. Even today, in a world driven by technology and instant gratification, philosophy remains essential. Algorithms may predict our preferences, science may explain the mechanics of the universe, but neither can tell us why we should live a certain way, or what makes life worth living. That is philosophy's domain, to ask not just how things work, but why they matter. Philosophy is also timeless because it adapts. In ancient times, it was about virtue and the cosmos. In the modern era, it shifted toward freedom, reason, and individuality. In our age, it asks how we can remain human in the face of rapid technological change, social upheaval, and environmental crisis. Every era faces its own big questions, and philosophy evolves to meet them. As we begin this journey together, let's strip philosophy down to its essence. It is the courage to question, the patience to think, and the humility to admit we may never have final answers, yet to seek them anyway. That is the adventure of philosophy, and it is open to anyone, not just scholars in universities. So, what is philosophy? It is the lifelong conversation between human beings and the mysteries of existence. It is a dialogue that began thousands of years ago and continues every time you or I pause to reflect. The only requirement is a willingness to ask. Now let me ask you, what's a question that has always stayed with you, one you've never been able to fully answer? Pause for a moment and think about it. That question, more than any definition, is where your personal philosophy begins. But to truly appreciate philosophy, we must look at its lived impact. Think of Martin Luther King Jr. and his vision of justice. His speeches drew not only from religion but from philosophy, ideas about equality, freedom, and human dignity rooted in thinkers from Plato to Gandhi. Philosophy gave him the framework to challenge injustice. Or consider the way philosophy enters medicine. Doctors today still recite versions of the Hippocratic Oath, a philosophical reflection on ethics in healing. When a doctor chooses between extending life at all costs or respecting a patient's dignity, they are wrestling with ethical philosophy in its rawest form. Even in the realm of science, philosophy plays a hidden role. Before Newton and Einstein, before quantum mechanics and relativity, there was the philosophical question: what is reality, and how can we know it? Science grew out of natural philosophy, the drive to explore reality systematically. Without that foundation, science itself would not exist. Philosophy is also deeply personal. When you experience loss, you don't just feel sadness, you also ask, why do we suffer? What does this mean for my life? When you succeed, you may wonder, is this what happiness really feels like? Is there more? These are not just passing thoughts. They are moments of philosophy, the soul searching for understanding. Another way to see philosophy is as the compass of civilization. Technology tells us what we can do, philosophy asks what we should do. Politics tells us how power is distributed, philosophy asks what justice really means. Religion may give us stories of meaning, philosophy asks how those meanings hold together under scrutiny. Without philosophy, humanity risks running fast without knowing where it's going. It's also worth noting that philosophy is not just Western. Too often, we imagine it begins and ends with Greek thinkers. But philosophy is global. In India, the Upanishads ask profound questions about self and ultimate reality. In China, Laozi and Confucius reflected on harmony, balance, and moral living. In Africa, traditions like Ubuntu emphasized interconnectedness, I am because we are. Each culture has its own philosophical voice, contributing to the global conversation on what it means to be human. Philosophy also trains the mind in ways that few other disciplines can. In a world overwhelmed by noise, information, and distractions, philosophy teaches us to slow down, to think critically, to question assumptions. It's like mental strength training. You don't build muscles by sitting still, you build them by resisting weight. In the same way, you don't build wisdom by consuming opinions, you build it by resisting them with questions, by lifting the heavy weights of life's hardest problems. And here's the beautiful thing, philosophy doesn't belong to experts. It belongs to everyone. Socrates didn't write books, he walked among ordinary people, asking questions in the marketplace. His classroom was the city itself. Philosophy flourishes wherever people are willing to think together. You don't need a degree to ask, what is justice, or what is truth? You only need courage and curiosity. That's why philosophy is evergreen. As long as humans exist, we will wrestle with life's biggest questions. The language may change, the cultural context may shift, but the essence remains. Philosophy is the endless journey of reflection, seeking, and growth. So the next time someone asks you, what is philosophy? Don't think of it as an abstract subject taught in universities. Think of it as the ongoing human project of asking, wondering, reflecting, and daring to live more consciously. And maybe, just maybe, the best way to understand philosophy is not to define it, but to live it. If philosophy begins with the impulse to ask questions, the next step is learning how those questions have been asked throughout history. To understand philosophy is to enter into a conversation across centuries, a dialogue where each thinker wrestles with the same eternal mysteries, yet offers new ways of seeing them. It is less like reading a single book and more like listening to a vast symphony, where each note echoes, challenges, or expands upon the last. Consider the ancient Greeks, often called the fathers of Western philosophy. Thales wondered if there was a single underlying substance behind everything, choosing water as his candidate. Heraclitus declared that all things flow, that change is the fundamental nature of reality. Parmenides, on the other hand, argued the opposite, that true reality is unchanging, and all change is illusion. From the very beginning, philosophy was not about consensus, but about dialogue, disagreement, and the pursuit of deeper clarity. Socrates entered this stage with his relentless questioning. He did not write books, instead, he asked questions that exposed assumptions and forced people to examine their beliefs. His student, Plato, wrote dialogues where characters debated the meaning of justice, love, knowledge, and reality itself. Through Plato, we encounter the famous allegory of the cave, where most people live like prisoners, mistaking shadows for reality, while only a few dare to seek the light of truth. Plato's student Aristotle took a different approach. Where Plato looked to eternal forms, Aristotle studied the world around him. He cataloged plants and animals, developed theories of logic, and explored ethics by asking what kind of habits lead to a flourishing life. In his view, philosophy was not separate from daily living, it was the guide to becoming virtuous, balanced, and wise. But philosophy did not belong only to Greece. Around the same time, in India, the sages of the Upanishads pondered the relationship between the self and ultimate reality, between the Atman and Brahman. They asked whether liberation could be found by realizing the unity of existence. In China, Confucius taught that philosophy should guide society through virtue, respect, and harmony, while Laozi spoke of the Tao, the mysterious way that flows through all things, teaching us to live with simplicity and alignment. In Africa, oral traditions carried wisdom about community, morality, and humanity's connection to the cosmos. The fact that so many cultures, independent of one another, turn toward philosophy shows us something essential. These questions are not luxuries of a certain people or time, but universal features of human existence. Every culture has asked, what is truth? What is good? What is real? How should we live? When we move into the Middle Ages, we find philosophy deeply intertwined with religion. Thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas in the West, or Avicenna and Averroes in the Islamic world, tried to reconcile faith with reason. They asked, can philosophy and revelation coexist, or must they be opposed? The result was centuries of profound reflection on God, morality, and the human soul. Then came the modern era, when philosophy shifted again. Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," beginning a new emphasis on the individual mind and the certainty of reason. Enlightenment thinkers like Kant argued that humans must use reason to guide morality and freedom. Nietzsche later challenged the foundations of traditional values, proclaiming the death of God and calling on humanity to create meaning for itself. And in the 20th century, philosophy split into multiple directions. Existentialists like Sartre explored freedom and responsibility, analytic philosophers sharpened language and logic, postmodern thinkers questioned grand narratives and power structures. Philosophy became not a single stream but a river branching into countless channels. Yet despite all these differences, one thread connects them: philosophy is the story of humanity seeking to understand itself. Each thinker wrestled with the same core mysteries, even if they answered differently. And that, perhaps, is philosophy's true strength. It never allows us to settle completely, but keeps us alive to the possibilities of thought. Now let's pause for a moment and ask, why should we care about these names and movements today? After all, most of us are not professional philosophers. We don't spend our days debating metaphysics or epistemology in lecture halls. But here's the truth: the questions they raised still live in us. Take the allegory of the cave. In a digital age, where so much of what we see is filtered through screens, where algorithms decide what shadows to place before us, isn't the cave more relevant than ever? Are we seeing reality, or just curated images? To step outside the cave now may mean questioning our news, our assumptions, even our own habits of attention. Or think of Aristotle's ethics. He believed happiness was not a momentary feeling but a lifelong practice of virtue. Today, surrounded by quick pleasures and endless distractions, Aristotle's voice reminds us that true flourishing comes not from indulging every desire but from cultivating character, resilience, and balance. Consider Confucius, who emphasized respect, duty, and community. In an age where loneliness and disconnection are on the rise, his teachings call us back to the bonds of family, friendship, and social harmony. Or Laozi, whose Taoist wisdom whispers against the constant push for control: let go, live simply, flow with the rhythm of life. Philosophy lives on not because we memorize names, but because the wisdom of the past can still illuminate the present. It becomes a lens through which we see our own time more clearly. This is why studying philosophy is like entering a conversation. Imagine sitting in a circle where Socrates asks you what justice means, where Nietzsche challenges you to create meaning, where Confucius reminds you of duty, and where Simone de Beauvoir demands you face questions of freedom and equality. You are not a passive listener, you are invited to speak, to challenge, to think. Philosophy is not a museum, it is a dialogue that is alive. At this point, you may be asking, but does philosophy ever give answers? The reality is, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But perhaps its greatest gift is not the answers, but the transformation that comes from the search. To wrestle with life's biggest questions shapes the way you live, the way you treat others, and the way you see the world. Think of it like climbing a mountain. The view at the top may or may not reveal everything you hoped. But the climb itself, the discipline, the struggle, the moments of wonder, changes who you are. Philosophy is that climb. And here's something crucial: you are already part of it. Every time you pause to wonder whether the life you're living is the life you truly want, every time you question whether society's values align with your own, every time you ask yourself what makes something beautiful, you are engaging in philosophy. You may not give it that name, but you are walking the same path as every great thinker who came before. So when we look at philosophy's history, we should not see it as distant or irrelevant. We should see it as a mirror held up to our own existence. The ancient questions are still our questions. The ancient debates are still our debates. Philosophy is not something we study from afar, it is something we live, here and now. Now let me ask you, who in history do you feel most connected to? Is it the boldness of Socrates, the balance of Aristotle, the radical freedom of Nietzsche, or the harmony of Confucius? That sense of connection is the beginning of your dialogue with philosophy's long tradition. And it may just shape the way you see your life from this moment forward. Philosophy, at its heart, is not only about the big questions, it is also about how those questions shape the way we live each day. If we stop here and reflect, the most important truth becomes clear: philosophy is practical. It is not locked in old texts or distant debates. It is the art of asking, thinking, and living with awareness. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. The alarm rings. You reach for your phone. Notifications pour in, emails, messages, headlines, all demanding your attention. Before you've even taken a breath, the world is already telling you what matters, what to worry about, what to chase. Philosophy steps in like a gentle guide and asks, must life be lived on autopilot, or can you choose differently? That's why so many philosophers insisted that wisdom is not just knowledge but practice. The Stoics, for example, believed that philosophy was a medicine for the soul. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor burdened with war, politics, and betrayal, carried a journal where he reminded himself, you cannot control what others do, but you can control your mind, your actions, and your choices. Seneca taught that life is not short, but wasted when we spend it on trivialities. Epictetus, once a slave, declared that no one can chain your mind unless you hand over your freedom. These are not abstract theories, they are survival tools. When you feel overwhelmed by stress, Marcus Aurelius whispers across centuries, focus only on what is within your control. When you feel that time is slipping away, Seneca reminds you, the problem is not that life is too short, but that we waste it. When you feel powerless in the face of injustice, Epictetus strengthens you, your mind is always your own. And yet, philosophy is not one voice, it is a chorus. Where the Stoics tell us to endure with resilience, the Epicureans remind us not to overlook joy. Epicurus taught that happiness is found not in wealth or excess, but in friendship, moderation, and freedom from fear. To live well, he said, is to live simply, with gratitude for the small things. Imagine how radical this message remains in a consumerist world where success is measured by possessions and status. Philosophy constantly pushes us to question, what do we really value? If your time, your health, your peace of mind, and your relationships are sacrificed for the sake of appearances, have you gained or lost? The great thinkers call us back to basics, to distinguish what truly matters from what merely distracts. Consider Descartes, who stripped away every belief until he found one certainty, I think, therefore I am. His project reminds us of a profound practice, to pause, doubt, and rebuild. How much of what we believe today comes from habit, culture, or social pressure rather than genuine reflection? Philosophy invites us to reset, to strip life back to what we can know and stand upon firmly. Kant, centuries later, added another dimension. For him, morality was not about consequences or convenience, but about duty, the responsibility to act in ways that respect the dignity of every person. In his view, to lie, cheat, or exploit is not just a mistake, but a violation of the very fabric of human worth. In today's world of fast decisions and ethical shortcuts, Kant challenges us to live with integrity, not because it is profitable, but because it is right. On the other hand, Nietzsche explodes onto the scene, not with quiet reason but with a hammer. He declares that much of what we call morality is merely inherited, conventions, traditions, and rules imposed by society. Instead of living under borrowed values, he urges us to create our own. To live authentically is to embrace the responsibility of shaping meaning rather than submitting to ready-made truths. His words may sound unsettling, but they also carry a challenge. Are you living your life, or someone else's idea of it? All these perspectives do not cancel one another, they enrich one another. Philosophy is not about choosing one thinker to follow blindly. It is about learning to hold different insights in your hands, turning them like stones in the light, and seeing what they reveal. Now, let's bring this down to the personal level. Imagine you are faced with a decision, whether to change careers, whether to forgive a friend, whether to stay where you are or take a leap into the unknown. Philosophy whispers into each scenario, what does justice mean here? What would bring true flourishing? What fears are illusions, and what values are worth holding on to no matter the cost? In this way, philosophy becomes not just study, but compass. It gives direction where life feels confusing. It strengthens courage where fear paralyzes. It creates perspective where anxiety narrows your vision. But we must be careful here. Philosophy is not meant to give us simple formulas. Life is too complex for that. Instead, it trains us in habits of mind, clarity, reflection, courage, humility. These habits prepare us for the storms of life, not by eliminating difficulty, but by helping us navigate it with wisdom. Think of Socrates again. His mission was not to hand out answers but to awaken people to their own ability to think. In Athens, he was often disliked, even feared, because he asked uncomfortable questions. Yet his legacy lives because he showed that the examined life is richer than the unexamined one. So ask yourself, what questions are you avoiding? What assumptions have you never challenged? Perhaps it is about money, about love, about purpose, about faith. To begin philosophy is not to find easy answers, but to become fearless in asking. This is where philosophy touches something eternal. Technology will change. Societies will rise and fall. But the inner questions of existence, who am I? What is true? How should I live? Remain. Each generation must face them anew, in its own language and in its own struggles. And when you face them, you are not alone. You are joining a timeless human tradition. You are sitting beside Socrates in the marketplace, walking with Confucius through the streets of ancient China, reflecting with Augustine in the quiet of his study, wrestling with Kierkegaard in his search for faith, and standing with Beauvoir as she demands freedom and equality. You are part of a dialogue that stretches across cultures and centuries. That is the beauty of philosophy. It is at once deeply personal and profoundly universal. Your questions matter, not because they are unique to you, but because they connect you to humanity's greatest adventure, the search for meaning. So, the next time you pause and wonder about your life, don't dismiss it as idle daydreaming. Recognize it for what it truly is, the beginning of wisdom. If we've journeyed this far, something becomes clear. Philosophy is not just the study of ideas, it is the practice of life itself. It is the invitation to live awake, to live deliberately, and to live as if our choices carry weight beyond the moment. This is why philosophers across time return to the same essential truth, that wisdom is not about knowing everything, but about learning how to live well in the face of uncertainty. Think for a moment about uncertainty. It shadows every step we take. No matter how carefully we plan, no matter how firmly we believe, the future remains unknown. Ancient philosophers recognized this, and they asked, how do we live with this uncertainty without being paralyzed by it? The Stoics responded with resilience. They taught that while the future is beyond our control, our response to it is not. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private meditations, reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words are not only advice for emperors, but for each of us. When life feels uncertain, when tomorrow feels heavy with the unknown, philosophy whispers, what matters most is how you choose to meet it. But not all thinkers agreed. Existentialists like Kierkegaard, Sartre, and Camus leaned into uncertainty differently. Instead of denying it or seeking to master it, they embraced it as the very condition of human freedom. Sartre famously said, "We are condemned to be free." What he meant was that uncertainty is not a curse, it is the gift that allows us to create meaning, to shape our lives through choice. To live authentically, Sartre argued, is to stop waiting for certainty and instead accept the responsibility of freedom. And Camus went further. He looked at life's uncertainty, at its seeming indifference to human hopes, and he asked the bluntest question of all, is life worth living? For Camus, the absurd, the clash between our desire for meaning and the world's silence, could not be solved. But it could be embraced. Like Sisyphus, condemned to roll his stone up the hill forever, Camus believed we must imagine ourselves content in the struggle, not because it ends, but because we face it with defiance and courage. These voices may sound heavy, but they carry an immense gift. They remind us that philosophy is not about escaping life's uncertainty, but about learning to live fully within it. It is about cultivating courage, responsibility, and acceptance. Let's bring this back to the present moment. Think of the last time you faced uncertainty, a career change, a health scare, a broken relationship, or even just the quiet unease of not knowing what's next. In those moments, philosophy does not hand you an instruction manual. But it does hand you something more powerful, the clarity to ask better questions. What can I control here? What values do I want to guide me? Am I waiting for certainty, or am I willing to step forward in faith, in courage, in freedom? In this way, philosophy shapes not just our thoughts but our actions. Aristotle called this practical wisdom, the ability to deliberate well about what is good and right for human life. He argued that the good life is not found in theory alone, but in the daily choices that align us with virtue, with excellence of character. For Aristotle, philosophy was always tied to living, to how we treat others, how we govern ourselves, how we pursue fulfillment. And yet, philosophy is not limited to the West. The East offers its own profound traditions. Confucius taught that wisdom is found in harmony, in fulfilling our duties to family, community, and society with respect and integrity. His philosophy reminds us that the search for meaning is not just about the self, but about the web of relationships that bind us together. Laozi, in the Taoist tradition, taught something different, that wisdom lies in flowing with the Tao, the natural order of the universe, instead of forcing our will upon it. Where the Stoics urged discipline and control, Taoism offers surrender and harmony, the insight that sometimes the most powerful act is to let go. What unites all these voices, from Athens to Beijing, from the desert sands to modern cities, is the recognition that philosophy is universal. It arises wherever human beings pause to ask, how should I live? And so, philosophy becomes a bridge between cultures, times, and individuals. It allows us to see that though our languages, customs, and histories may differ, the core questions of existence unite us. We all wrestle with mortality, with love, with freedom, with justice, with the search for meaning. We all desire wisdom, whether we call it by that name or not. Perhaps this is why philosophy is so enduring. Unlike technology, which becomes outdated, or politics, which shifts with every season, philosophy continues to matter because it addresses what does not change, the human condition. Our tools may evolve, but our questions remain. This is why to study philosophy is to participate in a conversation older than empires and yet still alive today. It is to sit with Socrates in the agora, to walk with Confucius among his disciples, to debate with Aquinas in medieval halls, to question with Nietzsche in the modern age. It is to join a tradition where every voice matters, including your own. But perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: philosophy does not end in the classroom, in books, or in lectures. Its true place is in your own heart and mind, in the quiet moments when you wonder what to do, who to be, or what it all means. That wondering is not a distraction. It is the very beginning of wisdom. So the next time life feels uncertain, remember, you are not lost. You are a philosopher at the threshold of a question. And the courage to keep asking, to keep reflecting, to keep living with awareness, that is what makes life not only bearable, but profound. Philosophy is not about escaping the mystery of life. It is about embracing it. It is about learning to see the world not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood. It is about realizing that every question, every doubt, every reflection is part of a much larger journey, the journey of being human. And so we end not with answers, but with an invitation. Keep asking. Keep thinking. Keep living deliberately. Because in the end, philosophy is not about reaching a final destination. It is about walking the path with eyes open, heart awake, and mind alive. Because in the end, philosophy is not about reaching a final destination. It is about walking the path with eyes open, heart awake, and mind alive. And if this journey spoke to you, take a moment to reflect on what philosophy means in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to see what question has stayed with you the longest. Thank you for walking this path with me today. If this video gave you something to think about, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Thinking Path for more timeless wisdom every week. And if you're ready to keep exploring, click on the video appearing here on the screen, where we dive even deeper into the ideas that shape how we live and how we think. Until then, keep questioning, keep seeking, and I'll see you in the next one.